100 books this year, so let's talk about my favorites. At the very beginning of this year, I had set my reading goal to 75 books. I had read somewhere in the 125 range the previous year, but this is my first year doing BookTube, and I knew that I would not be able to read the same amount. But I also really this year wanted to focus on quality over quantity. Did we successfully achieve that? I'm not really sure. I just kind of assumed that I was not going to read that much at all this month. And then I still assumed that up until the very end of the month, in which I proceeded to just completely rot and binge read Cowboy Romance. When I say binge read Cowboy Romance, I have read 6 books. December 26th is currently December 29th. I read 6 books in 4 days. One might call that a binge read or rot, and I had a really great time doing it. So I was trying to think through how I even wanted to talk about my favorites this year, and I circled back in between doing a book awards video, doing a tier ranking video, but I also just wanted to just chit chat about everything that I had read this year. After I finish The Witch Collector for a book club here in a couple days, I will have officially read 100 books. Now, out of that number, let's do some figuring, shall we? I went ahead and synced my Goodreads account to my Fable account, and our reading wrap up is gonna give us some good information. I hope. I don't know. We'll see. I've never done this before, so we'll find out. I started the year with fiery fantasies, drama. I think that's supposed to say ensued. Flock being listed as a fantasy. Iconic. Springtime magical mishaps. Wicked love reigned supreme. Okay, diva. Summer thawed with smoke and secrets and fierce romance. Honestly, it kind of did. Ended with wild tales, aliens drama, and dragon warfare. Guilty of having hot takes. Okay. Guilty of riding the hype train. Facts. Too niche. Okay, I actually really want to... I've been thinking about the series a lot, and I want to circle back to it. The top 5% of fantasy readers. I like how Magnolia Parks is on the fantasy list now. Danger Dancer. You seem to have a PhD in flammable romances, yet your taste reveals a fearless lover of chaos and high-stakes drama. 3.9 average rating. That feels about right. Okay, I'm just going to go into the stats section. My reader summary. I love descriptions of some of these things sometimes. Dark fantasy maven, your penchant for shadowy, complex realms. Hence, you'd probably thrive in a dystopian underworld. I think I'd die personally, but thanks. You flatter me. Just don't forget to stab in the back to get ahead. Interesting that all of those books are marked in June. I don't think that I had actually read all of those in June. Yeah, September was a weird month. Most read genre being romance. That makes sense to me. I read 14 young adult. That's actually shocking. 12 thrillers. Okay, what all counts in this thriller category? My fabled average rating being a 3.9 kind of tracks. I feel like this year was a good reading year in terms of like how much fun for the most part I had while doing it. But also I empathize with a lot of people who've said that this year was not necessarily their best reading year. But I also kind of think that I shot myself in the foot with that, because when I think back to last year, I read Throne of Glass, Chestnut Springs, and Red Rising all within like a couple months of each other. So like, how could it compare? But I do think we did get some really good books out of this year. My most read author so far this year being Raven Kennedy. It cracks me up that I have only actually read one series this year that had more than 4 books in it, being the Plated Prisoner series. One of my goals at the beginning of this year was to read and finish more series. I read more series. Did I finish them? Not so much. I got very much so into the reading mood and just wanted to start a whole bunch of series to see what all the girlies were talking about, and then I never circled back and finished these. We did, however, start and got 4/6 of the way through the Plated Prisoner series, and I am so excited to continue that in this next year. Sarah J. Maas. I did reread ACOTAR starting at the end of last year going into this year, and then I read Crescent City 3. Whenever that came out. Frida McFadden also was kind of a sleeper author for me, because I ended up just like plugging and playing in her books quite often, and they're a very good book slump. Like, I just need something in the background that I don't really need to pay attention to kind of things. I found an appreciation for the purpose that serves this year. Okay, so here are a couple of trilogies and or unfinished books. So let's start at the bottom here. Pen Cole. Dearest Pen, I am waiting on bated breath for Burn of the Everflame. Good luck, sweetie. We're cheering for you. I started that series back in the spring of this year, and I had such a fun time with it. It's funny now because I had read and completed Heat so long ago that at this point I'm kind of like I'm waiting for it, but I don't feel like at this point it really ranks in a favorites list necessarily, just because mentally I feel like I have been waiting for it for so long and it's not really finished in my head, so I don't necessarily think about it. However, I did really enjoy reading that series, so I'm glad I did get to it, and I cannot wait to finish that one out. Nalini Singh, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Maggie C. Gates and Carly Brenna, these two authors were the two series that I most recently literally just read, and I binge read all 3 books in each of those series, and I had such a fun time. I would really like to do a reading in the cowboy romance video sometime in the springish. Something I didn't do this year was binge read series as often, and once I started binge reading Plated Prisoner and then being able to binge read these two series, that definitely has brought to my attention that I do enjoy reading series and I do enjoy coming back to them, but I more so enjoy binging the books. I have always been a series binger. This year I kind of played around because I was doing vlogs and kind of trying to time out different things at different times. I did pop in and out of series a couple times, and I have found that that doesn't necessarily work as well for me, but I am glad that I experimented with that and discovered that this year because I am so excited to get to Rotten Reads and series in the next year. To go along with that Miss Lila's Sage, I did get to read Done and Dusted earlier this year, and then got to read Swift and Saddled, and then read Lost and Lassoed. I loved it. So yet again, I have read nothing but fantasy and cowboy romance this year. So, oops. Other than Bessie Liz Tomford, I read the second, third, and fourth books in the Windy City series, and I am waiting on bated breath for Rio's story and book 5. I'm so excited. Okay, so let's go through some Goodreads stats really quickly. I've currently read 44,070 pages this year, which I want to figure out a way to track that better. So if you do have a way that you track your reading stats, let a girl know down below. I'm open to recommendations, especially considering I did DNF several books this year that I read quite some page count, and I want to be able to build in a way in the stats tracking that I do that makes me feel like I'm making progress with DNFing books. I have a DNF shelf on Goodreads, and this year I did not use that at all. So I think there's definitely a better way to track it, but I think if I could figure out a better way to track it, it would make DNFing a lot easier on my non-DNF little brain. The shortest book that I read was That One Night. I read that book when I was in Nashville with the girlies on the Galentine's trip, and let's just say that series was a ride. My longest book was indeed Heat of the Everflame. My average book length was 445 pages, which is actually really interesting to me. My most shelved was Fourth Wing. My least shelved was actually More Than Promises by Lauren Beeson. Now, I arc read this a couple months ago. I've been thinking about this book an odd amount lately. Like, there are certain scenes that just pop into my head, and I think it's because I've been binge reading a lot of these small town books, but I am kind of intrigued to go back and read more books in that series. But at the time, that was the first and only book. My average rating for this year was 3.9, and I feel like that's definitely my feelings about this year definitely match up with that. I think that I had read some really, really good books, and I had read a lot of mid, but I also did have a lot of fun while doing it. So like, you don't completely win some, you lose some. However, when I think back this year to previous reading years, specifically last year, there was no chance that I was getting up there with last year. So while I obviously wish that this year was better, I think I'm okay with that. It tracks. So as you can see by a couple of the holes that are currently happening in the bookshelf behind me, I went and I ran around the house and I grabbed a couple books that I wanted to talk about. I scrolled through my Goodreads. However, something that I'm kind of considering is no longer rating my books on Goodreads, because I feel like it's not, I don't know, as indicative of how I really thought about the book. I really question how I rate things sometimes. I feel like I go back and forth with that a lot of times, and at the end of the day, the ratings are all just arbitrary, and it's about the fun that you have with the book, not the number that you put on it. So I am toying with the idea of not rating these. So all that to say, all of these books are my favorites, so don't really compare the ratings, because some of them are going to be 4-star, some of them are 5 stars, some of them I would rate down to a 4-star after giving it a 5-star. In any case, let's go ahead and talk about them. I was debating doing this in kind of a ranking order, but now looking at all of the favorite things in front of me, I don't think that I can do that. So these are going to be in no particular order, except for do I want to do top 5, top 4? I don't know, but I will leave my absolute top favorites at the end. Okay, we're going to start with these top 2 just because they are at the top of the stack, and also because they're kind of similar in the fact that they are both contemporary romances in the small town cowboy variety. These books are not similar at all, but we're just going to talk about them together real quick. So we're going to start with Lost and Lassoed. I wanted to be really organized and formal with this video, and the more that I kept being like, but these are all my favorites, and I'm just not really apparently an organized person, so chaos reigns yet again. I read the Rebel Ranch series this year. It's one of those that definitely got so much better as it went. I feel this way about a lot of these small town books that really rely on the found family element, because as these characters go, you're getting able to connect to the family and the different people in the family. Watching them all come together as you go is my favorite thing. So this series was so much fun to get to read this year. I also got to read Wild Eyes. While Wild Love wasn't necessarily a favorite, this was. I cried like a baby at several parts of this book. I wasn't really anticipating this one to hit me as hardcore as it did, and I absolutely loved it. So, you know, surprise, surprise, Elsie Silver strikes yet again. Okay, let's talk about Jade City for a second. I really love this book, and I objectively think that this book is a 5-star. It is one of those that is just absolutely immaculate. Heartstrings have been torn. Do I necessarily think about this on repeat? No, and I think that's just because I'm a fan girly at heart. I just love, okay, and I wish there was a little bit more romance, apparently. And this is not that. This is something else in its own category that is still also really good. So while this doesn't necessarily rank above some of the other things, objectively, this is one of the best books that I think have been written in a very, very long time. Like, if you're thinking of best books of all time, this book would definitely be on it. So obviously it has to be on this list. When the moon hatched. When I initially read this, I didn't really love it. The more that time goes by, the more that I think about very specific scenes. Do I think that this could have been shorter in certain places? Yes. Do I think that the pacing could have been a little bit different? Yes. But do I really love this overall storyline? Like, a lot. This book does something that not a lot of other books necessarily do, without being spoilery. The specific ideas that the author had to create this book are so interesting, and I think the storyline and the plot is so beyond special in a way. And while there are parts that I really did not like about this, this is a book that for some reason, I did read this closer to, I want to say February. It was definitely, maybe it was March. I don't know. It was definitely earlier on in this year. But the more that time goes by, the more that I'm like, remember that one time that one thing happened? Remember that other time that other one thing happened? Like, I genuinely like this book so much, surprisingly. And every time that I look at my bookshelf, I'm like, oh, Kaon. Hey boo. I think book 2 is really going to determine will this be an all-time favorite or something that I just liked. So I'm very excited to read book 2. Sari Parker, you got some work to do. Preferably. Thank you so much. To a similar effect, Book of Azrael. Okay. I was really conflicted whether I was going to put this book on this list at all because I thought book 1 was immaculate. I have started book 2 and I have soft DNF'd book 2. Do I think that the series is for everyone? No. Do I think that this book specifically was written for me? Yeah. Do I think or do I know that the rest of the series is going to be written for me? I don't know, but I had such a good time reading this book, and the feelings that I have wrapped up around this book and the experience that I had while reading this book was so much fun and was genuinely such a favorite time. So this absolutely had to go on this list. Diana is such an interesting main character. Like, she has so many elements to not only her backstory, but because she is an immortal being, she's had so many things that she's gone through, and I think that this book, it does a lot of things well. The romance in here was so good. There is a slow burn element to these two characters that I love. Like, I love me a good slow burn, and this book is slow burn at its core. This world feels really expansive, and I'm very curious to expand upon in the world. This is also a very unique world. I think that I've not really read a whole lot of things similar to before. There are a couple creature elements, we'll say, that I loved. I definitely want to and need to pick book 2 back up when I am in more of a headspace. This is definitely very angsty, very, very angsty, very tensiony, very rage-filled, slow burn in both the sense of the romance but then also the plot. So you kind of have to be in a mood to want something similar to that. And when I picked up book 2, I was kind of in the mood to just like keep it moving, and that's definitely not what that is. So I'm definitely intrigued to read book 2, but book 1 I had such a fun experience with, and I love her. The print date in here is actually on my birthday, so I think that this copy is just really, really special to me, but also this book is just very special. Okay, so now we're gonna call this top 6, and I'm gonna talk about both of these together because they are a series, and this lets me include more because I can't that way. So I had initially picked up Slaying the Shadow Prince and gave it 4.5 star, and then I picked up Lead and Steel, gave it a 5 star. Why I only gave this a 4.5 star, I don't know, because I don't like either of these more than the other. I really loved both of these. So I started with Slaying the Shadow Prince because Cass, I think it was during Ramathon, I couldn't decide what I was going to pick up, so I made everybody vote in a reading sprint, and Cass picked this one and this book. Okay, I think this is such a great introduction, and I'm so excited to continue on in this series in the new year, but also the next series I'm so excited about, and I've not even finished. I've read technically really only one plus a prequel books in this series, and I'm already excited for the next Helen Sure. So I need to get my act together and finish the series, but this series is so good. Okay, the particular world that we've got is very interesting. It's shadow magic, but it's not shadow magic just to be like cool and fun. It's shadow magic that's very much so built into the world. It's built into the plot. It makes a lot of sense, and I absolutely love that. I feel like there's a lot of big brainness happening with the particular magic system that then led into this world's greater plot. This was a very oddly sweet love story between these two characters, and I wasn't anticipating loving these two characters so much. And then as you get into Blood and Steel, Wilder, say it with me folks, Wilder, he is also just a really interesting character, and I'm so excited to see where these two characters go. But I had such a fun time reading this book. I cannot wait to continue in the series. Okay, let's talk about a series that really just like came out of, I was gonna say came out of nowhere, but it definitely did not come out of nowhere. I have had this series on my TBR for a hot friggin' minute, and it took me until just now to pick it up, but I kind of randomly picked it up, and I wasn't prepared for it to just like completely take me away in the way that it did, and it in fact did. So the Plated Prisoner series, and I'm putting these books out into the universe as a favorite. However, what is the favorite here is these particular audiobooks are so good. Okay. Had I attempted to read these books physically, I do not think that I would have liked them half as much. Guild I probably would have liked. Glint I might have liked. Gleam I might not have liked. Glow I probably also would not have necessarily liked had I not listened to the audios. The audiobooks are dual narrated, and I think that listening to these characters, because this is such a character driven story, there's not as much plot to this. So I think having the element of two people telling you their story and making that the impression of the story for you, or at least what it feels like whenever you listen to the audiobook, that definitely made this series such a fun time for me. I need to get a physical copy of Glow, but I did listen to the first 4 books in the series. I've decided I'm gonna wait to continue the series for when the Gold audiobook comes out in January, and then whenever the Goldfinch audiobook comes out in March, I will wait to finish the series until then, because the audiobooks really have been just such a fun time for me for this particular series. But I'm so glad that I picked this up. I needed a series to just lash onto, and these books just completely came at the exact right time, and I am very thankful that these happened. So these are obviously on the favorites list. We're getting into top 5 territory, and while it does feel weird to not put Plated Prisoner series, I think if I were able to finish the series, it would have been in a top 5. See, I say that, and I have not finished the series. House of Bane and Blood by Alexis L. Menard. I picked this up as a recommendation from Covers with Cassidy, and I loved every moment of this book. I listened to the audiobook for this one, and I would also really recommend the audiobook for that. There's art in the physical copy. I literally just ordered the physical copy of this a couple days ago, and this is the first time I'm flipping through it, and I'm like, wow. This book has such an interesting premise. I think the author said that the idea for this book came to her when she was watching Peaky Blinders, and this book very much so gives Peaky Blinders and like an urban industrial revolution city. This book was so fast-paced, so gripping. I finished this in all of 2 sittings. This was something that I could not put down, and it was so fun, so entertaining. I really loved the relationship between the 2 characters. You also get to see the relationship between all of the family dynamics that are happening, and getting to see the world at large. Here, there is some plot happening with all of these characters. It's a very character-driven story, and I loved getting to watch these characters trying to just like figure out what the heck is even happening, who's happening, what's happening where. It was so much fun, and I'm so excited to get to read the second book in the series, and I'm so glad that I got to pick this up this year. This book was so much fun. Okay, say it with me, it was so much fun. I feel like this book should be 87 times more popular than it currently is, and if you haven't read it so far, let me be the first to recommend this one to you. Okay, this one. Love. Okay, number 4, the Windy City series. I freaking love this series. I read Mile High at the very end of last year, and then I continued on into the rest of the series. Mile High I liked. It wasn't just like knock your socks off the best book that I've ever read. And then I read The Right Move. Okay, Brian Shea. I feel like I've talked quite a bit about this particular book on my channel quite a few times, and as I should, because I love how emotional these books get. You're getting a romance between these 2 characters that have had some things going on in their lives, but it is done in such an emotional manner to where you really are deeply connecting with these 2 characters. And the same thing happens later on in the series with Caught Up and Play Along. I really anticipated Caught Up to be my favorite. I think I actually like Play Along more than I like Caught Up, but definitely The Right Move is still my favorite one out of this whole series. I am someone who absolutely loves fan realm, okay? I do also love contemporary, but with contemporary, I need it to be emotional, and I need it to really still have the same kind of impact that fantasy is able to give a lot of times. Liz Tomford, she really just... she does it. She gets me. I feel like she writes my kind of romance. But I connected with all of these series, and then getting to watch the found family evolve in this series, I loved the way that you got to see all these characters interact, because as you do go along, they have family dinners all the time, and it's just so, it's so wholesome, while also being so angsty. So I absolutely love the series, and cannot wait for Rio's book, but at the same time I also can't wait for Rio's book because then it'll all be over. But I feel like this is a series that I definitely would reread, and I think that that's not as common with contemporary romance because there's not often as much depth to where you would necessarily get anything else out of it if you were to reread it. These you could. These use so good. Okay, so I'm cheating by like a lot, but I'm going to because I can. This is my number 3. I think that if I had to pick any of these, I personally would pick Burn For Me. I love Burn For Me, okay? It's very slow burn, very quirky, very funny. There were a lot of times when I was just laughing and I was like, wait, what am I reading? This is superheroes, but it's also funny and it's also very slow burn, and also Connor's hot, so like that helps. But I read these books in the same vlog and I had such a fun week reading these, so I'm counting them all kind of together, but I also think that depending on you yourself, you're definitely going to have a favorite. Burn For Me is probably my favorite out of these. Dark Fever is probably my least favorite out of all of these. However, I think that if I were to continue on the series, I would absolutely love the continuation of the series. This has a lot of plot to it and a lot of things that are going on and a lot of happenings that I would like to continue on, actually. And then Angel's Blood, okay? I had such a fun time reading this series. I have now DNF'd the series, but I did read the first 4.5 books. She is the moment, okay? Raphael's hot, Elena's a baddie, and getting to watch the two of them be hot and baddies together was so much fun. It was also really interesting to watch an older backlist fantasy romance, all of the different elements that were very popular and very commonly, you know, traditionally published at that time. Getting to see a then versus now kind of aspect was so entertaining for me. I really liked this series and I liked this story and I love these characters, but it was also so entertaining to me just to get to see the inspiration behind a lot of our favorite books, where some of that is coming from, because a lot of hint hint favorite authors, hint hint, have commonly said that this series is one of their favorites, and I've very clearly taken inspiration from certain moments in this series, and it was so fun just to get to watch this in a not that serious kind of way. It's not silly goofy whatsoever, but it also kind of felt silly goofy at sometimes. Like, it was just kind of a vibe where you could just like sit back and just have a fun time. Like, it's not so serious, and I really like that about this book. Tori and I also buddy read this, and it was so fun getting to buddy read this with her and kind of kick off our friendship, so I will forever be grateful to this series for letting Tori and I hee hee ha ha about the super nostalgic angels are flying through the sky, getting down and dirty moments. So I could definitely see how people would like Angel's Blood way more over than Burn For Me. I think Burn For Me was just like such a moment for me, and it has my name written all over it because of the slow burn. However, it's kind of a close pick because Angel's Blood is also so good. I also really liked the audiobooks for these. These books were written in 2009, and the audiobooks are definitely old school production style. It also just like kind of gave this like nostalgic vibe to the whole series, and it was just a really fun experience, so I'm glad that I got to have that this year, and I'm glad that I also got to read all of these because they were all just such a vibe, and I really enjoyed these. Now we're at our top 2, and I couldn't quite decide between which of these 2 were going to be number 1, which was going to be number 2, and I think I have settled on it fairly confidently. I haven't read the rest of the series, and it's because I'm so highly anticipating them, and I keep wanting to make sure that I'm going to read them at the right time, which is totally baloney. So I'll definitely be catching up on this series in the next year. Daughter of No Worlds. I was not anticipating this book being half of what it was, and I think that the plot was so beyond entertaining, so interesting. The more that I think back to these characters, the more that I'm like, I really miss them. I really miss them, and I think because I love them so much and I know that they're about to go through some pain in book 2, and surprise surprise, book 3, I keep trying to put off that pain, but I love this. Read this book in about a day, and I was so glad to have picked this up. It had been on my TBR for such a long time, and I'm really mad at myself for not reading book 2. Can you tell? But when I look back at all of the books that I read this year, this is the one that I'm the most glad that I picked up. This was one that just had so many really beautiful moments. The writing style in it was so good. There were so many quotes in it that just like did something to me. The feels, I was so emo reading this book. I cried it a couple different times. The evil villain in this book was very dark and scary and very compelling, and I think that that led to a really well crafted story, and I'm so excited. And also really scared and also kind of nervous, but I need to just pull the band-aid off at reading Children of Fallen Gods, because part of me is concerned because Children of Fallen Gods gets really mixed ratings, and I don't want to be mixed on it. Like, I want to love it as much as I love book 1, so I keep putting it off because I love book 1 so much. So I couldn't make this list without including this book, but I also couldn't do anything other than to include it as number 2. There were so many moments in this book that were so randomly wholesome. There were some very domestic, cutesy scenes in it, and there were so many moments that were just funny, and like so many sidebar jokes, and the character development between these two main characters, the romance was so good and just like really convincing and really believable. Like, I really felt like these two characters would actually be together in the real world. I don't necessarily always feel like that, because I think sometimes the inclination is to pick 2 characters that you really want to write about and put those 2 together, but I think that these 2 characters genuinely were perfect for each other. And I love them. Which brings us to book 1. I was not anticipating Quicksilver to be what it was when I picked it up. I picked it up thinking it would just be like a silly, goofy, fast-paced time, and I genuinely, the more that I think about this, the more that I'm obsessed with it. It starts off in a world that I wasn't really fully convinced by, but it's because everything changes very quickly, and when it does change, it is like, whoa. And then it changes again. And then it changes again, and then you find out some more information, and more information just keeps evolving. And the more information that you get, the more that I love them. I love these two characters. I love these two characters together. I love so many elements that are very spoilery that I don't want to talk about, but I also do want to talk about because that's everything that made me love this book. I am so intrigued to see where book 2 goes. But if I were to pick a fan row that like is indicative of all of my tastes, it's this. It is 100% this. I wouldn't say that this is a slow burn, but it's definitely a slower paced romance. But I also think that these two characters are so fun to read about. They're very layered, and then watching them go on this journey together was just so entertaining. The magic system in this book is unlike anything I've ever read before. It is so interesting, and I think that it's really setting a world that can be very, very expansive. So regardless if this world does get expanded or if it doesn't, I think that the magic system was so well thought out. I am like absolutely chomping at the bit to figure out what happens after where we were left off in this book, and I'm so glad to have read this when I did. I think everyone needs to read this. I'm in a couple of in-person book clubs, and we did book exchanges at a couple of them. This was the first book when I thought of what book that I would love to give to another person. I would say if you haven't read this book, I would not research a single other thing about it and just dive into it, because I really loved being blind going into this book. Had I found out more information going into it, those reveals wouldn't have been as fun, and I think there were so many reveals in this book as you went on that it made me so entertained. Like I felt like every moment it was just like I was gasping at several points of this book. I was just so gripped, and every time that we got another layer and we got another piece of information, I was just locked in, and I loved it. Callie Hart, you have my undying appreciation for the absolute masterpiece that is this book. And I'm kind of intrigued to read her contemporary books, because if her fan romance is this good, obviously her contemporary romance has to be good, right? But also the fantasy elements in this book were so well done. It did not feel like it was her first fantasy. Like it just felt really well plotted, really well balanced in between both the plot and the romance. The magic system was so well thought out. And even if she hadn't thought about it and she was just like kind of pantsing her way through it, it came off as so well thought out, and I'm so intrigued to see where the rest of the series goes. Anyways, that is all of my favorites from this year. While I don't think that I had the best reading year in terms of overall goodness, I did get to read some books that are at the all-time favorite level. But also this year was a year that I started my booktube channel, and I'm so beyond grateful for every one of you guys that have followed me on this journey so far. I'm glad that I started and I finally pulled the trigger, but you guys have been so supportive, and I feel like I've made so many friends doing this, so I am so grateful that you guys have made it here. Whether this is the first video of mine you've seen or if this is not, I'm so grateful for you guys for joining along in this journey and hanging out and live, laugh, loving, and reading books. So anyways, thank you guys so stinking much for watching. Like this year has just been absolutely incredible because of booktube, and I'm so grateful to have been on this journey with you guys. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night wherever you are, and I will catch you in the next one.